I'm using ink and a nib. So this is an old style of pen. It eventually changed into a ballpoint form, but this is still used by comic book inkers. And so this is an acrylic version. Normally it's called Indian or India. I don't know, Indian ink. Um, so okay, Glenn, welcome. So so that's what I'm going to be using. So I'm gonna open it up. I'm not going to start right away. I'm not going to jump into it, but I'm going to flip to my page, and we can start to take a look at what we're doing. Today we're doing the lighthouse. So if you have that page ready, awesome. If you've already started, that's okay. You can follow along and do it the way I'm doing it if you want, but really in the end, I'm just encouraging you to ask questions and draw along with me and hopefully have some fun. I'm going to kind of think about what I'm going to do with this because Indian ink is an interesting thing to try to draw with. Ink is pretty unforgiving. A pencil is more forgiving. So I'm just unloading this thing with some ink. I'll show you what that looks like if I can. But you see, I don't know if you can see that. I got some ink resting in there. So as I'm using it, it just kind of comes out a little bit. But the way I'm going to think about this is basically like a comic book, and that's my approach. So what do we got here? We got a nice tall lighthouse, a little shed I figure probably for the lighthouse keeper. Maybe he sleeps in there. They take care of the both places. Got a nice mountain ridge. I guess this is like a bay or something. We have a little boat passing through. A nice road leading to the place. Bushes on either side. We got little puddles with reflections in them. We've got some nice rocky kind of terrain here with additional puddles and little stones. Giant clouds, huge clouds with even reflections of those clouds in the water. Then there are little floaty clouds. There's a nice sun with some sun rays. I'm not sure how I'm going to approach that yet, but I'm going to worry about that, more of the structures first, I think. And you probably don't notice it. I've seen people miss this, but there's actually a little man in that tower. And he's just like having a look. I don't know what he's doing. He's pointing at something. Maybe he's thinking about replacing that bulb. Okay, so I've got my pen loaded. I'm going to try to figure out how I want to start, where I want to start. And it'll probably be on this little building. I want to make sure this thing isn't going to just flood out. I was practicing a little bit to get warmed up. And I'm not going to be super precise with my lines on this one. I'm going to let a bit of texture and let the flow kind of naturally come out. You know, something like a building like this, it can be a bit rickety. You know, it's supposed to be weathered because it's probably getting hit by waves, or you know, it's in a pretty unforgiving terrain. And that's kind of the lighthouse keeper's job, I think, a lot of times, is to upkeep these things, depending on the time period this actually exists in. I'm gonna try to add little extra details because I'm using this pen. It makes it a lot easier to do that. I'm trying to use a different like media type each day. So you know, a ballpoint pen I used colored pencils. You know, I've used, I think, regular pencil I did yesterday, I think. Can't remember now. And then today I'm using this kind of a pen. And partly the reason is I kind of want to show you that there are other things out there you can draw with. And that it's actually, because they're all a little bit different, it's pretty fun to explore them. And because they're all a little bit different, you kind of have to learn how to how to use them differently. So I'm definitely encouraging some comments in the chat. At the same time, I understand people are probably going to be drawing along, but if you are and you have an idea or you have something you want to tell me, like some epiphany you had, you want to share some cool little story about your drawing experience, or if you have an art question, you just want to understand something, happy to try to help with that. Otherwise, yeah, just enjoy drawing and relax, man. So you can see my drawing style is probably different. If you've been with me on a couple of these days, you'll notice I'm probably not drawing the same as I was with, let's say, like pencil. And the reason is because it just kind of like the medium itself is really dictates a little bit about how what kind of lines you're gonna get and what you could do with them to make them look nice. And I think I've spent enough time with a lot of these ones that I suppose I have my own styles for them. And I'm still going to do the appropriate thing, I think, which is to follow the edges at first. Right, so I'm kind of following the tree line, I'm following the road, and I'm not adding details yet. You can do whatever you like, but eventually I'm going to like go back into these areas, like this roof for instance. I'm going to figure out how I can add like tile, things like that. So it's a really fine line. I don't know if you can see all that. And that's one of the joys of this kind of a pen. You get to make these fine marks. And it's unbelievable to me that people used to write with these. And write beautifully, too. Like calligraphy back in the day. And now we're like losing cursive. And I still try to do some calligraphy myself, like still try to write well because I design logos for companies. So that's actually a valuable skill for me to have. So the interesting thing about this pen is the harder I press down, this piece of metal, it's kind of split in the middle. So if I press down, the pieces of metal widen and more ink will come out all at once. So I can morph my line from thin to thick if I want to. The challenge here though is going up this line, keeping it kind of straight. But I'm just thinking about hard edges, so not necessarily like little round edges. And I know on this corner I did make it a bit round, but I'm kind of ignore that and make it a bit sharper when I'm drawing here. You do what you like still. This is your drawing, so this lighthouse can be a general shape like this, but in the end it's going to be your version of that. So I'm altering my stance here. When I'm doing more up and down lines, I go like this. And when I do horizontal lines, I shift my hand entirely so I can make that mark a little bit easier. This window is three-dimensional, so it's just like this door. So to really push it to, I guess to inset it a little bit, I'm going to just draw an extra line here. And you'll see immediately as I do that, it looks three-dimensional. And that's perspective. The perspective isn't super strong on this image, but on a simple 3D object like that, it's you can still show that it's three-dimensional by doing a thing like that. I think this is a hexagonal shape. So the cylinder, this whole building, this kind of whiter side here, it's one side, then we have another one and another one. So you can imagine on the other side of the building, there's an additional 3 sides. So that's kind of what I'm going to try to think about as I'm doing it, that I'm drawing that kind of a shape. Apologies if you can hear my cat meowing. My cat's like a dog. She has a toy that she likes to bring downstairs until I throw it upstairs. It's pretty cute. Okay, so it's starting to look like a building. So I'm looking for some of the little shapes in here, inside the bushes. I think those will be important to really help it look like a bush, because they create the shapes of it. But so far, I'm not a huge fan of my lines on the bushes, but I'm just gonna accept it for now, because I know I can help it out in a bit. So I'm not gonna panic yet. I might just have to leave it for a little bit, looking not how I want it, and just kind of maybe let my brain work it out a bit unconsciously, because that happens. Sometimes I'll go, I don't really know a solution for this and I can't push through, so I'm just gonna take a break, and then I come back and it's like, oh, I'll just do it this way, and then somehow magically it works. But if I keep pushing, it doesn't actually help it in that moment. All right, I think that's looking pretty awesome. I'm gonna try to finish the tower here. I want to move on to some of these other areas, and so I want to get this general shape down. It feels a bit odd to just leave it. So this pen, I know I like to do little flicks, because you get a nice strong line if you do a bit of a flick. And that kind of requires maybe a certain relationship with your hand and the pen, and just kind of knowing what's a little bit what's going to happen, but not really. It's like throwing a basketball into a hoop. If you do it enough, eventually you don't really think too much about it. You're just doing the motion. You might be aiming, but your body is doing this automatic thing. And so I try to do that a little bit, get into this kind of zen state with my pen and the lines that it's making, and more just become the observer of it. Oh, totally. Stephanie says gonna have to dust off our fountain pens. They're pretty fun. This one, it probably works better than a regular fountain pen, unless this is technically a fountain pen. But I think I've always thought a fountain pen is like the kind with a reservoir built in. And the trouble with that is it could be the ink. Maybe you can replace the ink or choose a different ink, but this ink's working pretty well. It's not soaking through the paper too much. Thankfully, our paper's fairly thick. We chose really high quality paper. But fountain pens, I wonder if they just kind of flow a lot. I can't recall. I have some, and whenever I've used them mostly for calligraphy, and usually when I get them working, I think they flow more. I can't recall though, so sorry if I'm brutalizing the medium of your choice. I'm gonna do some more of these horizontal shapes on these areas, because you see how this goes out and in, and this goes out and in. That really is suggesting there's a plane right here. You see that? And on the bottom there would be one, and on these sides, all the way around, it's there. It's there here, it's there here, and here, and here. It's a building. So naturally it would have that. And on this page, it's very subtle, but in there you can see a brick pattern. Very subtle brick pattern. And I kind of, when I designed this page, I did it like an old cartoons or comic books, where I didn't make the whole area bricked, because that never looks that great. I can draw every single brick, it actually doesn't look awesome. It tends to look overworked and just way too dense. So instead I have the pattern a bit broken up, but you might have to find it. Even in the book here, it's a bit light, so I have to look kind of closely. And I can make it out, so I'm just going to kind of put in some of the ones I'm seeing. And you see it just kind of creates this more subtle brick pattern that, in the end, it should make all the other details kind of stand out and not become all about the brick pattern. But I'm not going to work it even as much as it's in there. I'm just going to kind of like suggest it. And you can do a little bit wherever you like if you're understanding how the pattern works, because the brick pattern is pretty simple. You put a brick in, put another brick in, and all the other subsequent ones are, the lines go in the middle of the previous brick. And that's the pattern, right? So if you want to add more on these other sides, you just kind of pay attention to the size of the bricks, and you can put them in there yourself. And just have fun with it. That's again the point of these books, to help you help you draw, like enable you to actually draw. I'm putting little door handles on my door, maybe a little window. And I do want to work on this roof. I think it would be a neat place to add details. Because tiling, like roof tiles, are like bricks. It's really the same pattern. But usually roof tiles have different textures, is all. So they have like a gravel or a little grit on them. And then the tiles are usually altered in their hue, so some are darker, some are lighter. And I'm going to define the edge a little more because I don't want it to get lost. It helps define the shape and make the building more readable. And there's a little baby roof here over the front door. And I'll throw in a few lines. Here you can have a gander how that's turning out. So far so good, pretty awesome. Let's see. I'm afraid of the clouds right now. Not gonna try to worry about that fear because you see, like this part's working pretty great. It's possible to mess it up, but that's something I have to allow myself to do. But I want to kind of establish the foundation of my drawing, which I think is the ground, it's the trees, and then this area can maybe be lighter if I'm feeling like I don't want to make the lines the same as these. And that may be the case in the long run. So I'm going to start working on some of these lines. And I'm going to go for the bigger ones, the ones I think should be a bit more prominent. And I'm just going to play with my lines. I think what I'm going to do with the water here, right next to the rock, is I'm going to break it up a little bit. I don't want a solid line here because I kind of want to suggest that the water is moving in that area. An interesting problem with these pens, if you're using a cheaper paper, when you're drawing, you get this. It's kind of scraping the paper, so you can get a bit of a buildup of like paper fiber. So it can kind of clog on the tip. I don't think it's doing it now because this paper is decent. Which I'm thankful for, because it can really it can really be a problem if you're shooting for a nice clean drawing. I think I might be getting a bit of a build up here. Just wipe it off. Kind of pinch it in a piece of cloth, paper towel or something. So now the way I'm drawing with this, going sideways, so when I pull down, the lines can be a bit thicker. It's because that metal's spreading apart. And I'm only kind of generally following these shapes. I'm letting myself kind of be more expressive with my lines. I'm going to kind of move over to this puddle because it has a nice reflection in it. I'm not sure how I want to deal with it, so I want to have some time with it, see how I feel about it. And so usually I'll start on something. I'm making that side of the puddle a little bit thicker of a line because I want it to read as sunken into the ground. And that's perspective, right? Same with this window. If this is a flat plane going that way, I can actually draw this. If you have a flat plane going away, let's say that's the hole on this flat plane, then you can think of this like a box. And a box would look like this, right? And if I show the transparent version, it goes something like that. So to have a flat, kind of like a hole in there, right? You have your hole. You just draw the inside of the box like this. You don't draw this outer part because it's sunken in. It's not the outside part. Hopefully that makes sense. Now that sucks. This ink can be unforgiving, so I actually made a pretty big blotch there, and I can't really undo that. I'll have to put some paint on there or something, some white paint. But whatever, it's a sketchbook. It would be an eyesore if I were to put it on like my wall or something. But in the end, it's fine. Maybe I can figure out, a solution for that. Okay, so now for the reflection, I think I'm going to try to just keep the line as thin as I can. And that's all I'm going to do. So I'll work on these other little puddle areas. So I think one strategy I'm going to use, these bushes here, this part of the road, this is all much more toward us, right? So this is closer to us than this stuff. So I think if I use a thicker line here, then even just back here at the lighthouse, it will feel closer to us. That doesn't mean I don't have to doesn't mean I sacrifice detail either. It just means some of the lines need to be a bit bolder. Could be a big bird. Someone suggested a big bird. Yeah, bird might work. And that's a good thing to show you guys, because you really can take like a real glaring mistake and turn it into something else. And that's creative problem solving. Glenn says, an anvil falling from the sky. Get out of the way, boat. Yeah, sure. You draw whatever you want. You can do that. I think a lot of cartoonists as well use this kind of a pen because you get these interesting expressive lines when you do flicks or even just like general movements. I think it has a creative, I don't know, like just a different expression of line style. Yeah, Stephanie says she likes the black ink. Really stands out. Yeah, I agree. It's fascinating to me when you take a page like this and you add lines to it at all. I mean, black ink is very like prominent, but as soon as you add lines, it brings it to life. Like, oh man, this needed lines and nobody knew it. And that's kind of part of the principle I was talking about, I think yesterday, where maybe I didn't. I know I've explained this a lot to people, but to keep the eye interested in an image, you kind of have to add complexity in a way. So if you have just simple lines on a piece of paper, very simple, like 4 lines, your eye is going to look at it and understand it right away. But if you add more detail, more lines, the eye has to look at that a little bit longer to understand it. If you add You add shading, you add texture, pattern, you get the negative space in there, and then you keep adding things like that. Your eye has to, or wants to, spend more time there. And it's an interesting principle to consider, so to make an image that someone actually wants to look at or is compelling. There's lots you can do. Da Vinci used to use he used math in his artwork, so it had a whole nother like kind of essence to his pictures, because it had a familiarity or something to it that you couldn't necessarily put your finger on, but the logical part of your mind, I think, was connecting to it and understanding at least something there, trying to connect to that. So again, I'm working on reflections in the water here. So now I'm turning my pen over, because this is how you get thinner lines. And I'm working on all those reflections, and I'm just making them thin lines. And these differences in line quality, they kind of matter. So I've got broken lines on the shore here. I've got thin lines in the water. I've got thick lines up close. I've got thick lines on the edges. And you could say these are like rules. So if I follow these rules, I'm going to get a consistent image. And I think you're just going to kind of read it a bit better. It naturally will read, I suppose, more consistently. So it's probably easier to read. Because you'll understand what the image is that you're looking at a little bit better. You'll understand where the shore is, what are reflections versus what aren't reflections. So this horizontal line all the way across, this is shore. We're pretty far away. And I'm still going to break it up, because I feel like the water's moving. So because of that, there naturally would be disturbance there. Oh yeah, Stephanie says, thanks for talking about perspective, because it's a struggle for her. It is a struggle. It's freaking mind bending. Putting reflections in is also mind bending, because you can deal with perspective like this fairly easy. You just do a 2-point perspective. Go, okay, there's 2 points on the horizon, and all my lines go to those points. That's crazy enough. But then try to like think about a reflection under the world and how it ought to look. Getting that right, to me, is still a struggle for me, because it's a much more advanced, I think, concept. So I'm still learning. And interestingly, one thing I heard about art, professionals and amateurs, is that everyone needs to always work on fundamentals. So that's understanding your value scale, knowing, really practicing the basics. So line quality, perspective. All those things need to be kind of revisited pretty often. And it helps to learn and grow. So I can tell my pen's getting a bit clogged. I use this ink with watercolor as well, because it's acrylic ink. Acrylic basically means plastic. So it will dry, harden, and then when I use watercolor on it, because it's plastic and it's dry, it's not water soluble. So the water doesn't move the ink around. Which is important to me, because if you do an ink drawing, let's say you do a drawing like this, then and you want to color it, you might not want to mess up your drawing. You might want to keep all those lines exactly where they are and just add color. So that's what this ink would be for. So one thing I'll talk about too during this, and it just occurred to me, something I wanted to talk about, is that this copiographic style is like inking a comic book. Very much is. Um, it's tracing. You're following along the edges. You're following my color shapes, the guides, and they're instructing you on the shapes to make and where maybe to put your lines. They're not telling you exactly what to do, but they're guides. So to think of it like I'm inking a comic book is pretty awesome actually, because inkers can bring a messy page that's been drawn to life. And then you translate that. So if you have a lot of fun inking these things, let's say pencil or pen or whatever, then you can actually maybe start to do your own drawings. And then if you draw in pencil, you draw lightly, you can go back over it with a pen and really make nice, beautiful lines. And then you erase your pencil drawing underneath, and what you're left with is a nice, clean drawing. And then if you want, you can color it. And that, my friends, is how art is made. So I'll ask this question. How are you guys finding this image so far? Because this is a unique image in this book. In this book, this is probably what we consider to be more of an adult theme, because it's just a beautiful scene. It's not a silly character or some kind of funny thing. It's like a painting. But I'm wondering if you're struggling with it, or if you're enjoying it, or what you're thinking on your end. What are you finding difficult about it, or pleasing? So I'm gonna start adding some more details in here. Still have the road to do. I think other than that, this bottom image is mostly done. I'm gonna pull some of these lines in. You don't have to do this, but I've spent time drawing nature, and I've spent a lot of time painting nature. So don't be overwhelmed if you're not sure how to add these extra details. I think just trying to experiment and think about it really helps. So when I'm thinking about this road, I'm thinking, okay, it's muddy dirt. There's maybe more bumps, maybe rocks. So adding detail with that in mind will help it become more, or be more realistic. Jenna says, I'm finding it more difficult to expand beyond following the outlines. Need help to add more detail. Yeah, that will be a challenge, I think. Doing something that's it's probably out of your comfort zone, especially if you're a person who doesn't draw um, a lot on their own, or draw from nature. You're gonna just not have that library in your head built up of like the things you could do and the things that are possible or the things that you've seen. You might not even analyze the world around you to know what details you might add. And that's what's cool about drawing a lot more is your mind kind of changes and you start to observe the world around you, and you notice, like, okay, you notice leaves in a certain light, or the way, branches on trees tend to form. So if you practice drawing them, then you develop familiarity with those things, and that kind of thing helps you add detail. You can also just look up images. Like, so for instance, this, you could say Google rocky shore, and come up with something like this, or a muddy driveway. You could look up plants, you could look up bushes, and you just draw some of the details you're seeing. And you could literally just do that, and that would really help. But building up your mental library is pretty important, especially if you're going to draw freehand. Yeah, Stephanie suggests, how about doodling in abstract, which I gather means just drawing random, more abstract shapes rather than more solid objects, I suppose. And that's true. Like, that's a pretty good way to develop adding interesting details. That's something I learned from Drew Struzan, even, in a way, because he'll draw like a triangle randomly in the middle of something logical. Like, you could say like that, just adding little triangles in here. It might not make sense because you're like it's a triangle, but triangles exist in plants. Leaves are bushy. So if you just like throw random little details in there, it can work. You could like draw circles. Squares is maybe the only thing that would be a bit odd in a thing like that. But yeah, I've seen Jenna's drawings, and she does actually do quite interesting patterns. Very creative. So adding more realistic details, yeah, it can be challenging, but definitely references is the number one way to overcome that. So I'm adding a thicker line on certain parts to help something stand away from other things. So even this line here of these bushes and this road, I'm going to be making that a little bit thicker in areas, because I want to show that those are different places. And when you do something like this, it can feel like you could go there. If I walk a little bit there, I'll be in the bushes. Make it feel like a solid place. It's hard to put that into words, but I think about that often when I'm drawing a scene that has nature in it or something. I try to think about a little nooks and crannies that I could literally sit down, and I spend time in that little spot for a second. Like this little spot, maybe it's grassy, so I'm gonna draw some grass in it and try to draw how it would feel. You do that for a second, and then it just brings it to life a little bit more. So I'm getting to where time's moving on, so I probably need to get to the clouds here. I think this is all looking pretty great. I'll give you a close-up before I do that. So I like that so far. I probably will do more in here eventually, but since I'm running out of time, I want to make sure I get to the clouds. And this smudge, maybe I think I will make it a bird. I think that's a great idea. So I give it a little head and a beak, and I'm gonna say its wings are up. There you go. It's a little bird now. And now if I don't want it to look out of place, you put a couple more in there. And it's possible these are some kind of blue heron. Some wings will be down. And these are actually abstract shapes as well. You can do the classic bird shape, which is one of these. Classic bird shape. So I could do some back here for you. Danger with this pen too. You might end up putting it right into your coffee. It's not even a joke. Okay, so now I'm going to start on these clouds. Try to keep it light, I think. And I'm going to rotate my page because it is easier to make these shapes this way for me. It's just the way my hand naturally moves. I don't want to smudge my ink, so I have to be aware as I'm doing it. I practice mindfulness. I know, right? Stephanie says she put her brushes in her coffee so many times. Definitely. Yeah, me too. I don't recall if I keep drinking it or not. Ooh. So that dug right in. I'm getting some. The danger of these two is because they're kind of sharp, they can stab right into the paper. Yeah, ideally I think you want to pull it, not push. So this got thicker here because it kind of stabbed in, so I'm going to just kind of add some thicker areas around it to make it look like I did that on purpose. Which I didn't. There are a lot of lines on this page, Glenn says. Very true. It is very liney. You know, a lot of these pages, they are pretty simple. But I think that you're meant to spend time here. So when we do things like this, often it can feel like I just want to get it done. So you're doing something and then anxiety builds up, potentially. I'm not saying this is absolute. You just want to get to the end. And you see the work ahead of you. I think that's what happens. You go, and I'm sure this is probably not what you're saying, but I'm just commenting. Yeah, all this work I have to do that's ahead of me. Or even all the work I've done. Look at the road behind me. And there can be anxiety from that, so my suggestion, if you're feeling any of that, is just to kind of relax. Don't put that pressure on yourself, and really just enjoy the line you're working on. And make that the point of this. You can stop whenever you want. You can go somewhere else, draw something else if you want. You don't have to like power through anything on this. That's kind of the point of it. It's creative. Don't feel like doing it? No, just stop. Come back later. Now, I do it for work, and often I actually do feel that. And so I actually do figure out how to power through, and that is how I do it. I relax. I try to enjoy where I'm at. Make the best of it. Enjoy making something look better. And then if I need a break, I take a break. So I'm really curious to see your guys' drawings, by the way. If you can message them to me, like take a snapshot of it if you're willing to. You don't have to if you're not proud of it, or whatever, if you're just shy. But otherwise, definitely send them to me. I like to see them. I like to see what people are doing, how they're being creative. And, you know, if you don't mind me sharing them too, let me know. I'll try to remember to ask, but I want to also encourage others to try new things. And I draw the way I draw, and you guys draw the way you draw. I did another smudge there. That's okay. So showing people how you can do it, what's possible, I think it's really important. So you don't have to don't have to keep the color in the lines. It's kind of funny to say that. Normally with coloring books, it's always coloring within the lines. But this is actually keeping the lines on the color. You don't have to. Just make lines, I think, that you're liking. And that's what's important. If it bleeds a little bit in and out, it's cool. So there is a final step to this, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, or I probably will just do it, but there's sun rays coming off this sun. I don't think I'm going to like illustrate them in the sky. I'm going to leave those, but I'll probably put some lines on the sun here. There we go, just add some textures. Okay, the sun. It's a perfect circle. Absolutely perfect. I'm not going to draw it perfectly. That's life. So I'm going to use a broken line because it's bright. Makes sense to me. Bam. I'll probably leave it like that. The sun, because I like that the sun rays are coming off of it. I like that it's still. I mean, it's a star sitting up there, you know, solar system. Add some rogue lines in here following the same path as the road. And that will create this flow. This same kind of like flowing line thing you could do with a river. One thing I want to do for myself that a friend of mine is doing is more plein air drawing. So going out into nature and drawing actual scenes. Because you can just walk out into, your yard or go down the road where there's some stores or go to the forest and just draw a tree, draw a building, and just follow what you're seeing. Try to draw what you're seeing. Don't have to be perfect, doesn't have to look great, but sometimes it's just worth playing around and doing it. All right. We're pretty well there. It's turned out pretty nice, I think, other than a few little mistakes, which happens with this pen style. Normally, whenever I've used it, I would end up cleaning it up digitally. So I'd scan it and then use Photoshop to just like fix problems because I usually end up painting things digitally for work. But in the end, you could use paint, you could use whiteout, you could turn it into something else.